You can salvage your plaster, and I'm more of an advocate of salvaging plaster than ripping it off and doing it again. If you need to patch plaster, that's fine, do it. A lot of jobs I have, I walk into the house and it's just laugh, because people have gone, all the plaster was cracked and it looked horrible and it had stains all over it, and I couldn't bear it anymore, so I got a floor scraper and I scraped all the plaster off, and now I need it to be replastered, and then they do a little bit of research and think, oh crap, that's going to cost me a lot of money, it's going to take me a long time. So what I like to do is to get on the ground floor with projects and walk around people's houses, probably as they're buying them or thinking about buying them, or they've just recently moved in. So, because a lot of this stuff now, there's some modern stuff that's sat down there with Plaster Magic written on it, which is basically a commercial form of a museum quality set of chemicals that people in Egypt and high-end country houses, palaces, houses of parliament, senates, they use that type of chemical to keep every piece of plaster in the building they can without having to take any of it out. It was developed by a German chemist called Rogan Haas, and was taken up by the Getty and various other places around the world. And the gentleman that you see, if you look at there on the box, Mr. Rory Brennan, he's a chemical engineer based here in the United States who actually worked with Rogan Haas, and he developed this material so that everybody else that doesn't have a palace or a castle or a museum can actually salvage a lot of their plaster. So we're going to work on a little bit on this wall, and I'm going to show you, we touched a little bit on the technique of how to discover whether your plaster actually needs it. I'm also a great believer of if it's not broken, don't fix it, because you try to fix something that's not broken, you're going to break it. I can guarantee, if you don't break that bit, the bit next to it will break, and you'll be, going forever. It's going to be a round robin thing. How do people feel about cracks? Melinda and I had a shabby chic discussion earlier about cracks being okay. Any?
Bigger.
No, people don't like.
Shipping.
Yeah. Character. Yeah. A lot of stuff I've worked on, a lot of my houses still have cracks in plaster. I've actually consolidated medieval plaster up to where it's failed and left the masonry exposed, because that's the way I found it. And that was when I was younger, and it kind of put it into stasis, and I'm not sure that's right either. It's kind of mothballing it, and now that I'm older and I've spent more time in the world, I'm not sure I've done the right thing. Rose?
Opinion on cracks, seeing your thinking. Okay, to me it looks like it's something that's going to fail.
Okay.
So it looks like something that you really want to do the test on, and it just looks like something that, okay, yeah, I could leave it alone, but it's probably gonna keep doing something. So I would be saying, why is it cracked? Is it a settlement situation, or is it a delamination?
That's the real question. That's what you should be asking yourself. A crack can be, okay, step back a bit. We'll say this is dry and we finished it and it's all nice and dry. We did it yesterday and it looked absolutely beautiful and white and perfect. And we walk up here and everybody goes, wow, that looks fantastic, it looks absolutely beautiful. I get my sprayer bottle and I mist it with water and it looks like the desert pan in Utah. Like that. There will be a million micro cracks in that plaster. There is no lime plaster or gypsum plaster on the planet that does not microfracture within 24 hours of being laid on the wall. It will, believe me, honestly, I've shown clients, I shouldn't because they don't like it, but you put the water on there. So there is, fundamentally, the material, it fractures. It's so fine, it's so micro that it doesn't make any difference to it, and as soon as it becomes damp again, or the atmosphere changes, it's self-healing a lot of time with lime, not with gypsum. So even a brand new wall is fractured. To me, a crack is not always a failure. A crack is the building moving, a little bit of settlement, paint, you know, because paint is more brittle than plaster. So you could have paint here that's distemper paint, which is basically glue and pigment, which is really brittle. The building moved, the plaster's fine underneath, and the paint cracked. And everybody walks in and goes, oh, the plaster's failing, there's a crack. Not at all, you know. So I'm driven by the fact that if a crack moves, it may be time to do something about it. These cracks don't move. You could quite easily just give them a fill with fine putty and it'll be fine to decorate over. And it won't, you know, it won't come back. If like that, you see the physical movement there? It hasn't failed, and it probably never will fail in a catastrophic way, but it's moving. But these cracks here, they're not moving. You know, I'm putting my full body weight on that. It's not moving. This, that moves. So I would say something here moved substantially. One of the uprights, some of the timber framing, either warped when it was put in, you know, when it was originally built, it was put in and something happened and it moved, and the cracks taken a long time to telegraph through, or the building settled, something like that. So plaster cracks because something makes it crack. It very rarely fails unless something makes it fail. There's always an environmental problem or a physical problem that makes the surface fail. Plaster, like water. That doesn't mean the plaster failed, it was pushed out because it couldn't cope with this extra environmental pressure that it had. So this, I think we should fix, simply because not only it's moving, it won't ever fail, but it's going to be annoying when you try to paint it. And anything you try to fix here in these cracks they're never going to fix, because as soon as somebody or anything puts any pressure on here, even if the air pressure changes in the room, it's going to open the cracks back up again. So that's going to be a never-ending crack. Over there, we can see the leading edge on the plaster at the top there. I would definitely glue that back in the plane that it's in now, which is the other important thing, because as soon as you try, Christine and I had this conversation, a lot of people advocate screw washers when you're doing this to tighten the plaster back up again.
You got stuff behind it.
If there is so much dust, you know, micro rubbish behind that plaster that you end up, everything looks like a quilt, you know, like with a button quilt. It's I really don't like it. I don't understand. You break the plaster, therefore you're snapping the hair, probably, which is giving the plaster strength. So as soon as you start doing that extra unnecessary force, you're causing problems. So it's again, it's a case of personal preference. I know people who live in £100 million houses that have walls like that. They love it. I've got friends in the south of France who have a house that looks like this. It's in Condé Nast property all the time. There's people there filming, taking photographs. They absolutely said to the contractor, go in there, make sure the plaster doesn't fall on anybody. Don't fix anything that doesn't need to be fixed. Minimum intervention. And it's one of the happiest houses I've ever been in. I mean, it feels happy. The building itself has this joyous, joie de vivre atmosphere about it. It's really, really happy. And the people that live there, they're really happy. So, you know, they didn't spend 10 million euros on fixing their house. So we're going to, this is a simple process. Because I'm 57, I have memory loss. When I'm doing my surveys, I would physically survey, but something like that, I would mark up with just pavement chalk. Because when you're doing a house like this, even this room, by the time you've got from one side of the wall to the other side of the wall, you've generally forgotten where you actually need to do the survey. And I would do it from top to bottom, all the way through. So what I want people to do is go a bit crazy, walk around the room and press the wall. Before I used this Plaster Magic system, I make my own system up. There's a fairly common conservator's formula for making the consolidant and the glue up, which you can buy from, you buy various chemicals, you mix them together, you use denatured alcohol, you fall over a couple of times, you pick your brain cells up, try and put them back down in your ear. And you have to do it in a well-ventilated room 25 miles away from the nearest high school and stuff like that. It's kind of crazy. So this system is exactly the same chemicals, but it's in a handy, corking tube that you can just buy a $2 corking gun from Home Depot, as opposed to trying to find, 75C syringes and the number 17 syringe needles that that are blunt ended and all. It's kind of a drag. Even for us it's a drag. So this has just simplified the whole thing. So it's a two-part system. This is the conditioner. They call it conditioner here, which is basically what happens is, as some people have already pointed out, as soon as you've got a failure of this plaster, because in profile the plaster, a wall plaster basically looks like that. And here you've got laths. But if you've got a failure, the lath is here. So all this area here, sorry for my horrible drawings, is probably full of dust and detritus and horrible stuff. I don't know if anybody in any form of madness have ever tried to stick dust together for some unknown reason. I know that it's impossible because, even with plastering, if I try to plaster on a dusty surface, the plaster will not stick to it. The dust will stick to the plaster will fall away. So that's the same with this. If you try to just suddenly glue it with the second part of this system, all you do is you just glue all this dust to itself, not to the lath, not to anything else, it just glues to the lath. So what we use is this, which is a conditioner, which is in essence, it's a very runny version of this. It's water-based, so it's not alcohol-based. It used to be alcohol-based, but now it's water-based, which is a good thing. And that will, when you apply it through the nozzle, or you can actually find some syringes if you've got some, you know, it'll blow out a lot of the dust. It also conditions that dust to solidify it, so that when you put the second part in, it's actually a solid piece that's against the plaster and against the lath. So you're actually going to run the whole gluing system in itself. So, standard 3/8 drill bit. Here I would start here, probably. Try and find a lath if you can, usually about 1/2 an inch or 3/4 an inch away from the crack. You can immediately feel that I've hit a lath there because the drill bit will bounce. So then I would say that probably the next lath is going to be here somewhere. Yeah. And here, this crack's a lateral crack, so it's probably following the gap between the laths. So the lath is going to be there all the way along. So I would, yep. Every 5, 6 inches. We're not going to be able to save that, so that would be a patch. So just make the holes like that. Get one of these guns ready. You don't have to do anything particularly fancy with it. I've undone the nozzle of this so that it sprays, not a spray, but like a jet. The way that I do it, I think I need probably some safety glasses. This will spray back at you. I also use either cloth, painter's rags is fine, anything that's absorbent. I just use this because it's convenient. Take the nozzle, drip, and just spray once in the hole. As you can see, it's going in pretty easy. And sometimes this is all you need, strangely enough, because this is just a watered down glue, so this will actually consolidate. If you had really friable plaster like that down there where Lana was pushing at it, and you actually loved it, you could spray this as a fine mist, and that would keep that plaster like it is now. Yeah, that patch there, yeah. You could spray that with this, and it would stay broken dust. It wouldn't dust, it wouldn't fall down, it wouldn't go anywhere. It would stay exactly like that. It would look exactly like that. The only problem is, because this is a polymer, in those situations you're adding plasticized polymer to your plaster. So you're going to lose your breathability. You're going to gain an aesthetic if you like that broken down factory plaster aesthetic, but the breathability of the plaster will disappear. So it's easy to remember where you've been because the plaster around the edges of the holes are going to show up as damp. So, and then you can leave that to do its own thing for 2 minutes while you prepare yourself. Some people say leave it a couple of hours. I don't like to leave it a couple of hours. I like the hygroscopic pressure of putting a liquid against a liquid as opposed to putting a liquid against something that's a polymer set. I don't think it works.
What if, say, you sprayed that stuff and then all of a sudden you had to leave and it was sat for a couple of days? Would you come back and?
Yeah, fine. You can do it that way, but my personal choice is that, but I've got teenagers, so I have emergencies every 36 seconds. So I try to keep this as small as possible on the nozzle because I find that if you have a huge nozzle, then you're going to end up pumping a lot of this stuff into the wall. This is when it gets fun because this stuff is thicker, so it does actually look like cork. It won't splatter so much out, but it can go on the surface of the wall, so you try to keep that as a minimum because again you're plasticizing the surface of the wall, polymerizing the surface of the wall. So, and that's why I like to get that. That's all you need to do with that. And
How do you know how much to?
it comes out. It'll. So with that one, let's see. That's enough. So, and that's why I like to use these rags because when I put that one in, you saw that one move. So that means that that's full. You can wipe this off with a wet sponge as well, just before it sets, but you can't do it once it's actually hardened off. So you're stuck with it if you've... I found the trip hazard again. And then you just wait until you see it coming through. Now, what I also sometimes like to do when I've got a crack or the split that moves quite a lot, just to make sure that it's stuck, that the material is actually moving in behind there. I like to do that. And that means the surface behind there is completely covered because it's pushed out any excess material. So make sure you take it off. This usually sets properly overnight, and with these holes, what I would do, I would just get some lime putty or even some ready-made spackle if you're really, really in a hurry, and just fill the hole. Lime putty you probably have to do twice because it'll shrink back a little bit. Not so much, and it's actually sealed around the edge, so the lime putty will just sit on the glue and it'll go for it. So, and that's pretty much the technique. So we have one drill, plenty of this material, and now we have some holes around the room so people can try it. But I would say please put your safety glasses on when you're doing it, and please wear gloves, because also your hands will become so sticky that you won't be able to get out of your car later. You'll be stuck to your steering wheel. This is designed specifically for sticking plaster back to something and allowing it to move. It's like a elastomast rubber blob behind there that allows the vibrations of the environment to be taken up by the plaster. Some people say, no, you have to screw this back and get it back into plane. We just said, I find that very difficult. Sometimes, maybe 1 in 10 times, it works great. But then, you know, I get 25 of those right, and the last 3 break the plaster into a horrible hollow or something, and I'm like, well, now I fixed this beautiful ceiling, and I have a horrible thing here that I have to fix, you know. And I don't like that. I think maybe it's moved for a reason, which is another thing. You know, the house is moved, the plaster's given away and allowed that space for it to just give but not fail. Therefore, just give it the space, but give it a little bit of extra bump so that it doesn't fall off the walls.